Assalamu alaikum, dear students. Today we are going to talk about classification. So, what is classification? Outlines of today's lecture are downward classification. So, first we will discuss downward classification with example, and then we will discuss upward classification with example. What will be the lecture outcomes? What will be the outcomes for today's lecture? So after watching and listening to these lectures, students will know about the concept of classification and taxonomy, also the types of classification like upward classification, what is upward classification, what is downward classification and taxonomy. So you will know about the concept of classification, then its types and taxonomy, which is very important. So first we will define classification. So classification can be defined as the arrangement of organisms into groups and subgroups on the basis of similarities or differences. So this is actually called classification, and we do this. We practice classification everywhere, in like even in our own home, in our kitchen. Like for example, in our own kitchen, we classify the things according to their use. For example, you put all teaspoons at one rack, then you place all the tablespoons in another rack, you place all the cups for tea, which is actually the use is for tea, so that's why you place them with each other, an isolated rack, and you place glasses, which are used for drinking water, so you place them in another rack. So you do not do like we do not mix the things like the spoons and the glasses and the cups. They are not mixed, so they are placed isolated for ease of access. Like we can easily access them when we classify them, when we place them isolated. So classification, the purpose of classification is actually the ease of access. For example, there are a lot of animals, a lot of plants, so a numerous number of bacteria are there. So when we classify them, we can reach them very easily. So actually classification is the practice of organism, like classifying organism into groups and then into subgroups for the ease of access on the basis of similarities and differences. So if they are similar, they are placed in one group, and if they are different from that group, we place the other in another group. For example, if certain species have similar characteristics, we place them in one group, and other species which have similar characteristics, so we place them in another group. And why we are placing them in different groups? Because they have different characteristics. And why we keep them in one group? Because they have similar characteristics. So now, depending on the basis of history of classification, classification is of two types. Like for example, downward classification, and then the next one is upward classification. So both are like a bit alike, but the practice, the approach is a bit different. Like for example, in what we do in downward classification, so definition of the downward classification, it is actually based on principles of logical divisions. How, like in which it is a type of classification in which subordinate groups is split into subordinate groups, either two or more than two. Mean there is a large group, subordinate group, a large group which have too many organisms, or too many plants, or too many animals are there. We split them into subgroups, into smaller, the huge group into smaller groups. Like for example, if there is too much diversity in the group, the subordinate group will be more in number, and if there is not much diversity in a super group, so there will be a few subgroups or subordinate groups in that subordinate group. uh, like for example, what we do here, we we divide phylum into classes, and then classes into orders, and orders into genera, and so on and so on. Like for example, let's take an example. It is not a real example. We will just take a dummy example. For example, there is a phylum. Um, you name it, whatever it's name it. For example, it's a phylum XYZ. Okay, and then like you divide this super or the huge one group into smaller groups. Like you divide the phylum into classes, like class A, class B, class C, class D. Now the class A have these the organism inside this class have similar characteristics. The organism inside this class has similar characteristics, and so on and so on. For example, if you have this phylum chordata, let's suppose for example chordata. Chordates are all those which have that vertebral column. Okay, we take it very simple. Now we divide into classes, 5 classes, like Pisces, the fishes. So class 1, let's suppose for example this class 1 is of fishes. Okay, so this is fishes. So fishes, they have similar characteristics, that's why they are placed in one group. Then another group, like for example amphibians. So all amphibians, they have similar characteristics, so they are placed in another group. Then class reptiles, and then class aves, and then class mammalia. Okay, then if then we divide the classes into orders, because class is again a very huge group, a very large group, a very diverse group. So we then divide this like this subordinate group into subordinate. Like for example, class A is divided into, so now forget about the class B, C and D. We are talking about the class A. So phylum XYZ was divided into classes A, B, C, D. Then forget about these 3 classes and just talk about the class A. So we will class A will be divided into orders W, X, Y, Z, and then forget about the X, Y, and Z. Just talk about the order W. So order W will be again divided into subordinate classes or groups, like families, and the family E, family F, family G, and family H. And then again forgot about these, just talk about the family E. So the family E is again a very huge group, so we'll divide it or into subordinate groups, and it will be genera. So genus 1 genus I, genus J, genus K, and genus L. So then again you forget about these 3 genres. Just think about the genus I. So again we divide the genus, because it's again a very huge group, so we divide it into species group. So species M, species N, species O, and species P. So this is actually the downward classification, where we split the sub or subordinate, the huge group, into subordinate, into the smaller groups, and so on and so on. So this is actually the downward classification. Downward classification was like practiced by many scientists, and very early time, very primitive, and a very primitive time. Like for example, animals were divided into blooded animals and bloodless animals. So now those animals which have blood, and those animals which do not have blood, the invertebrates, they have hemolymph, so it's kind of blood, but there's not a blood, not a red blood. So blooded animals and bloodless animals. And then again the blooded were divided into hairy and hairless. For example, birds, they don't have hairs, and hairy, the animals, the mammals, they have hairs. So subordinate were divided into subordinate, and then again the subordinate were divided into subordinate. So animals into blooded and bloodless, and blooded into hairy and hairless. So these were actually on logical this division was on the logical basis at the time of Aristotle and some other scientists. So this was actually basically the idea of Aristotle and scientists like Carl Linnaeus and Andrea Cisalvino. So these were the scientists who had this idea of downward classification. Now let's talk about the upward classification. And actually in practice we practice upward classification, not the downward classification. It was very primitive. So what is upward classification? So by definition, it is actually the arrangement of species into groups. Arrangement of species. So we start at the lower level, not from the higher level, not in the subordinate groups. We start from the subordinate. At the bottom, we start at the bottom. We collect species, and then we study their characteristics. On the basis of their similarities, we place them into one group, and then so on and so on, and we go up and up and up and up to phylum, into kingdom, into domain level. So H is actually the arrangement of like species into groups by accepting some characteristics which are common. For example, like all the canines which have canine teeth are placed in one genus or one group that is known as Canis. So the dog, the jackal, the wolf, these are placed in one group, Canis. Why? Because they have certain common characteristics, and those common characteristics are the presence of the canine teeth. So it is actually the arrangement of species into groups by accepting some characteristics which are common. Let's suppose, for example, you have 10 species: A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H, I, J. The different colors shows their differences, that they are different from each other. So for example, we have these 10 species, but like let's suppose, for example, if we say that the first five they have certain characteristics which are coinciding with each other, they have some characteristics in common, so we will put this into one group. And for example, if the F, G, H, I and J, they are coinciding, or they are having certain characteristics in common, so we will put them in another group. So for example, this was a group, we put this in species group X, and we put this one into species group Z. So we accepted what we did, we accepted certain similar characteristics, and on the basis of those similar characteristics we placed them into groups. We were having these 10 different species, but then we looked at it, we analyzed it, and when we found that these first A, B, C, D and E are, they are like they have some certain certain characteristics which are common in them, so we placed them in a group X, into one group. And then we also analyzed the another five, and F, G, H, I, J, and we found that they have some characteristics in common, and we placed them in a group Z. So this was actually the idea of Buffon and Edinson. Now, for example, let's take another example. It will be just a logical example, not a real example. In the last we will go for a real example. For example, we have objects like this triangular shape. This is also a triangular shape. So, the spherical shape. These the rectangular shapes. So we have the star shapes. So we have these. For example, we have these different objects. Okay. Now we have these different objects. We are not talking about the species, the animals. We are just talking about objects. So on based on logical like classification or logical discussion, when we look at these structures, first thing come into our mind is the differences in them, and then certain similarities inside them. So for example, if I give you the task that just go and classify or place these structures into groups, so how you will group them? So you will think about certain characteristics which are common in them, and you will place them, though they are every structure is different from another. This is different from this one, different from this one, everyone is different from the other one, but there are some characteristics, if you think about them, they are in common. For example, let's place these objects, not species, so forget about the species or genre group. Let's think about let's place these objects into groups on the basis of their similarities. So what we will do, for example, we will put these like these star shapes objects in one group because they have like many angles, like here the star like angles, so we will place them in one group. So we consider this one group. Then we are going for the other one, these two, because they have a bit similarities with each other, so we place them in another group. And then we are going for the rectangular one and we place them in another group. And then we are going for the triangular one and we place them in another group. And then we are going for the like the spherical one, so we place them in another group. And then we go for this one. These are not circles, okay? So we place them in another group. So they are not circle, they are not rectangular, they are not triangular, they are not star shape. They have like a bit different form, so we place them in another group. So like these were different objects, but we placed them like these were 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 14 15 16. These were 16 objects, but we placed them like in 1 2 3 4 5 and 6. So the 16 number was reduced into 6. How? On the basis of certain similarities, we placed them in similar groups. For example, again, if you want to classify them again into on the basis of certain more similarities, if you want to place them again into like another group, if you want to reduce the number, so let's place these genera. So for example, if we consider these as genera, consider these as species, and then we consider these as genera. So on the basis of similarities among them, we will place them into another group which is known as family. So let's divide them again on the basis of their similarities. Now these now look at these all they are different from each other, although they're different, but basically if you look at them, they are all like star shapes, all of them. So we place them in a very big group, and then these are rectangular shapes are placed in another group because they are very different from another, and they all everyone which has like which spherical or circular shapes were placed in another group, and the triangular are in another group. So now the number from 16 reduced to 7 and then into 4. So now, and also these groups on the basis of similarities can be placed into orders, and then into phyla, and then into kingdom, and then into domain. So this is how we go for the upward classification. Now let's take a real example from the real life. So like for example, we have this dog. It's a wild dog, and this is wolf. It's not a like domestic dog. You can place here a domestic dog, but it's a wild dog. And this is the wolf, and this is the jackal. So now look at them. They are very different from each other. This is dog, this is wolf, this is jackal. They are different, but we place these three species on the basis of the similarities. What are the similarities? The presence of the canine teeth. We place them into a genus that is known as Canis. So we place these three species into one group which is known as genus. Why? Because on the basis of certain similarities. Now, in another group like lion, tiger, and snow leopard, and cheetah, and domestic cat also. Then, on the basis of certain characteristic, because all of these have like the lion, the tiger, the snow leopard, the cat, the cheetahs, they have cat-like characteristics. So we place them, and they are known as felines. So we place them in another genus group which is known as Panthera. So all of these are like grouped into Panthera. So though lion, tiger, and snow leopard are different from each other, but they, on the basis of similarities, we place them in one genus, that is Panthera. Now, the dog, the wolf, the jackal, they are placed in a family Canidae. These were placed into genus Canis, and this that Canis genus is now placed into family Canidae. And then the cats, the tiger, the lion, the leopard, they belong to like the genus Felis, and also to the genus Panthera. But all of them, all of these cats, tigers, lion, and leopard, they have cat-like characteristics, and they are placed in a family that is known as Felidae. So Canidae, Panthera, in Felis. So Felis, Panthera, and Canis, these three genera are now placed in family, one in family Canidae and another in the family Felidae. Again, these all of these have some other characteristic in common. So what are those characteristics in common? These all are like carnivores. They feed on flesh, so that's why they are placed into order Carnivora. So what we do, we start from the species, and on the basis of the similarities we group them into larger groups, like species into genera, then genera into families, and families into orders. And now let's go to the next slide, where we will place like for example cats, dogs, lion, wolf, tiger. They are like carnivora. They are in carnivora. Then cow, human, whale, goat, and rabbit. Now some of them are like herbivores, they are not carnivores, and some are omnivores, like whale and cow and goat and rabbit. These the rabbit is like herbivore, the goat is herbivore, the whale is herbivore, the cow is herbivore, the human is omnivore. They are very different from these one. But again, cats, dogs, lions, wolf, tiger, monkeys, cow, a human, whale, goat, rabbit, duck-billed platypus, spiny teeter, and so on and so on. There are many kangaroos. All of them, they have certain characteristic in common, which is mammalia. Like they have mammary glands, and they have hairs. So we place them in a class mammalia. So we place these all the herbivores and the carnivores and all of them into one class, that is mammalia. And again, then what we do, we place these fishes, cow, human being, whale, goat, rabbit, cats, dogs, lions, wolf, tigers, sparrow, parrot, eagle, hen. Now look at the difference. Fishes are very different from cow, human, whale, goat, tiger, and lion. Sparrow is different, very different from these. These are birds. These are like mammals, and these are fishes. And then snakes, lizards, crocodile, turtles. Again, they are very different from each other, from every one of them. And then frogs and toads, again very different from human beings, from sparrow, from everyone. But look at the importance. They have one very important characteristic in common. What is that? That is the presence of the vertebral column. So we place them into a phylum Chordata. So we started from the species and we reached to phylum. Like the species were placed into genera, genera were placed into families, and families were placed into orders, and orders were placed into classes, classes were placed into phyla on the basis of similarities. And now we will place and can these all the whole animal, all include all animals, the invertebrate, the honeybee, okay, the amoeba, the sponges, the salamanders, the worms, the nematodes, the scorpions, and the starfishes. So all of them, and all these are now grouped into a kingdom Animalia, as a very supreme group, a very huge group, because they have they have some characteristics in common. They are all animals. It doesn't matter they are vertebrates or non-vertebrates, they are mammals, they are reptiles, whatever they are, but they are animals. So that's why we place them in Animalia. And then we place all of such things into a domain, which is known as like domain is eukaryota, because all of these have eukaryotic cells. Plants, invertebrates, vertebrates, fungi, they all have these eukaryotic cells. So then we place them into eukarya or eukaryota. Thank you so much for watching. uh, Please, if you have any question, ask, feel free to ask any question. Thank you so much.